Start recording. Welcome everyone as you're coming in. Just be another moment. As everyone is coming in from the waiting room. Welcome, welcome. All right, great. I think we have almost everyone in here. Nice to see those of you that have cameras on, and nice to be with you that don't. It's fine, whatever you prefer. Totally up to you. I do just want to mention that we're recording tonight, and we do tend to save our programs on our website for our archive. So hello, just letting a few more people in. My name is Sari Kamen. I'm the Public Programs Director of MOFAD. Some of you know me from coming to virtual programs throughout the whole past year since we've been doing them. It's been just about exactly a year. So thank you if you are coming back to a program with us. And thank you if this is your first time joining us. We really appreciate it. MOFAD is a really small nonprofit food museum based in New York City. And since March 2020, our doors have been closed. So virtual programs are literally the thing that has been sustaining us through this really challenging time. So we are so grateful for your support. And it's also just been really wonderful to connect with so many new folks, such as yourself. I know you're coming in from all over the United States, maybe even farther away. And of course, we have 3 panelists tonight for this program who are all actually based in the Bay Area this evening. Priya is from New York, but I know she's out there tonight. So one of the best things, one of the only good things about the pandemic is that we get to connect with people all over the place, which is really a wonderful silver lining. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and really just thank Brandon and Tienlon, of course, for writing this beautiful book and say congratulations. And thank you to Priya for being in conversation with us tonight. And of course, it being AAPI Heritage Month, we are so honored to be able to host this conversation. So Brandon, why don't you kick it off and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Sari, and thank you for to MOFAD for hosting this talk. My name is Brandon. I am the chef and owner of Mister Jiu's in San Francisco, Chinatown. We have been open for about 5 years, and yeah, we always had a very, I think, deep relationship with the neighborhood of Chinatown, and we're really proud to continue a legacy of restaurants that have been in that building. So, thanks.
Thanks, Brandon. And Tienlon.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Sari, again for MOFAD hosting us. We're really excited to be here and talk about this book and all these important topics that it brings up. I'm a writer and a lawyer. I've been writing about food since forever now. Right out of college, my first job was writing about food. But I've been waiting for a chef like Brandon to work on a book like this. Brandon was the first chef I ever met who, of his caliber, who really appreciated not only who could express himself in such innovative ways, but also still think about his place within the larger history and continuum of culture. And I really was really excited to be able to write this book with him because of that.
Thanks. And I'm just going to pass it over to Priya, who is going to kick it off because she's the moderator this evening. And just quickly mention that there is going to be kind of a reserved time at the end for Q&A. The chat is going to be open, so feel free to drop your comments in throughout, but Priya will take questions towards the end. So with that, thank you so much and enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Sari. Yeah, my name's Priya. I am a food reporter for the New York Times, and I'm actually on assignment right now, which is why I'm not in my living room. And I wrote a cookbook called Indianish that sort of similarly explores identity and being a third culture kid. So I'm really, really excited to be here with both of you who I know well. Tienlon used to write for the food magazine I worked for, Lucky Peach, and Brandon I have known for a while, and we did a dinner together for the launch of my cookbook. So it's very exciting to be on the other side of that right now. So thank you both. I guess the first question I wanted to ask was, I think, there are a lot of ways to go about writing a cookbook. You can center yourself you can choose to do more of a survey. And I feel like you sort of took an interesting middle path of, this is a story about you and your restaurant, but it's definitely a story of a broader community. And I'm sort of curious to hear from both of you why you chose that approach, why you wanted it to be not just about like, here's who I am and the food that I cook, but here's the community that enabled like my profession and my career.
Yeah, I think, well, I just want to say hi, Priya, because you're awesome, and I'm super happy that you get to be here with us. So, but yeah, I think in the larger context of, I would say, finding purpose in my career, I think I wanted I wanted to discover something that meant more than just putting a recipe together and, you know, kind of having that recipe be a little self-servient to like just a chef's ego. I started to think back of the things that really were important to me and what kept me, or like what actually made me interested in actually cooking in the first place was that interaction about learning from someone, getting to sit down at the table with them and enjoy something they prepared, learning about that recipe from the importance of that recipe to them. All those things, you know, I started to relate to my own family and my own memories of certain dishes, certain people, where I had certain like food memories, and some of those were very much vivid memories of Chinatown, of how it was, and even like how the building, when it was Four Seas, the restaurant before us, some of the events that we went to there as a kid, a lot of these memories became maybe just something that felt like it was more important than kind of a culinary path per se, and I think when the ball started rolling of where I was trying to find like a space, like a restaurant space, I really put it out there that I would really want to find a spot in Chinatown, and I think, yeah, some of it was serendipity in some ways, and some of it was just, I think, just you know, a lot of perseverance. But I feel really lucky to be able to, you know, still just to have Mr. Jiu's be in that space. So I think when we were thinking about the cookbook, I think we always knew that it was going to be influenced by other parts of the neighborhood, because that's what inspires me. And I think being able to tell those stories, I think that was kind of what was the power of, I think, what I realized more purposeful, I think, cooking was really about storytelling, and also passing on a lot of these food traditions and Chinese cooking techniques to another generation of cooks. So
I think it's really remarkable in the book. Just, you talk about kind of the extent to which, when you were opening Mr. Jiu's, you really wanted to involve the community. You know, you not only researched the history of the space, you had not only gone to that space when you were younger, but it just seemed like there was real community engagement that I feel like when, you know, people who have not lived in that community for the whole time come into a new community, open a restaurant, there's often this idea of, we're going to improve it, we're going to make it better, we're going to revitalize it. And the book sort of feels like it is reflective of the approach you took with the restaurant too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gave me a lot of strength as a chef, and as, you know, really a first time a chef owner, to know that what we were putting there was already there essentially, or had been attempted before, or
Yeah.
and kind of lived like legacies of businesses in that space already. So I think actually feeling some of that, like what was already here, just to kind of uncover it and show people again. I felt like I had a lot of those memories just even walking around Chinatown. And you know, there's these things to uncover that kind of that I think are very much comes from like a curious perspective of just walking the streets and having your mind open to what was here before. But I think when you actually hear some of the stories and you actually learn about some of the cooking techniques, and you learn about like the dishes that have come from Chinatown, I think the mentality of how those dishes are put together, it gave me a lot of structure to keep our restaurant within. And I think every chef, whether they like it or not, I think we kind of need structure to build a certain kind of experience, or else it's just kind of like all over the place. And I think having some of, I guess, the history lessons of Chinatown, that has been, yeah, just a huge source of inspiration for me as a chef, and also just being proud of the community for what it's had to endure, and what it continues to stand for, and so yeah.
And Tienlon, you did an unbelievable job sort of documenting that history. I mean, just looking at like the bibliography alone, I was like, she was sort of deep diving into, I imagine, books and records that had not been opened in years and years and years. And I'm sort of curious, you know, I was surprised that like I was learning so much, and that stuff had not been sort of documented in like a modern text before. And I'm sort of curious how about that process, and why it was so important to you to sort of dig so deep.
Yeah. Well, going back, this kind of ties back to your first question. You know, it was like, we couldn't tell Brandon's story without talking about how he thinks about food, and you can just hear it in how he's talking now about how much history affects him and how much he thinks about it when he cooks. But also we needed to establish sort of a baseline understanding for people of Chinese American food and why we were calling it Chinese American food. Because even with, you know, our editors, who are wonderful in so many ways, they would ask questions or frame them in a way that suggested that we needed to start from the beginning, because it was like, hey, why is Chinatown so closed off? Why did so many people choose to live in Chinatown? And or even questions like, is Ed Foo Young an authentic Chinese dish? And just having to realizing very early on that was what most of our audience was working with, and what weren't as lucky as Brandon as to grow up going to Chinatown, and or me, you know, speaking Chinese Mandarin. I think that was like, you know, a requirement. And then when I started digging into things, it's interesting, is like one of the first things I did was read as many of Brandon's favorite Chinese cookbooks as possible. So now we have duplicate libraries. And all of these books that came before us that are in English, because all the ones that are in Chinese that were in Chinatown were lost in the fires. Anything before 1906, lost. And then after that, people started writing in English. The only ones that were published by major publishers were by people who had to aim for home cooks, because that was sort of like the next step. Like when you integrated this new immigrant culture in through food, it was like, okay, now how can other people replicate this dish at home, right? And so a lot of these things were framed in ways where they skipped over like what they used to be. So it was like sweet and sour sauce is like condensed frozen orange juice with sugar and ketchup. And that was only because of the era that these people had to write for, like convenience cooking and like canned foods and things like that. But there were still, we'd find these little techniques in there that that I know Brandon glommed onto right away, and that, you know, they were like little secrets. You're like, this is like how it used to be, even if the ingredients aren't written out the way that maybe that chefs in Chinatown are actually still cooking something. And I really love like puzzling that together and seeing like the concessions that were made, but all, and like to fit with the times and also like people's expectations, but then also wanting to bring that back, like explaining what was lost every time we made something simpler or adjusted to the ingredients that were more readily available to people in a regular grocery store and things like that. And so that led me down this whole tunnel of looking for obscure techniques and reasons why. And so I ended up in a lot of old archives around San Francisco and the Bay Area, which has a lot of ephemera, like old menus and random photos. But those were the only ways to put it all together, because while we've had some amazing Asian American, Chinese American scholars at Stanford and Berkeley putting these together, they haven't really looked at it through the lens of food specifically, or in the lens of food at this in this way. So it took a little bit of synthesizing, but it's fun. I think I'm more of a historian than I thought I was.
You mentioned the question of authenticity, and I think that's like a really hard one. And I think one that I imagine any person of color living in the United States who is sort of deeply rooted in their heritage, but is writing a book with an American publisher must deal with. And I'm sort of wondering what that push and pull felt like for both of you, having, you know, both of you are very rooted in your heritage, but children of America. And you mentioned like the editor would ask you these questions. I'm sort of curious how you sort of grappled with that in the book.
For a lot of the recipes, we tried to just go through pulling out what were deemed as difficult, you know, from the publisher's point of view. And so we kind of made a list of, because they kind of gave us these parameters of saying, okay, you can have 5 hard recipes and, you know, 15 medium hard recipes, and the rest of them need to be easy. And it's like, well, what does that really mean? So, you know, in our context, we wanted to give them like, or, you know, create a definition that we both agreed what those things were. And I think, you know, we were trying to just, you know, pull out, like, is it the number of ingredients? Is it the number of the length of time that it takes to perform the recipe? Is it active time, or, you know, all these things that we just wanted to understand what they deemed as what was, you know, easy, medium, and hard. And what we were trying to avoid is getting anything deemed as hard just because you know, maybe the ingredient was in their mind hard to source. And I know that's a real thing, because, you know, we have a lot of access here in the Bay Area to a lot of ingredients, and a lot of Asian supermarkets or markets and farmers markets and all these things. But I think we just didn't want to have to make too many substitutions if we didn't have to. Our restaurant already does in some way, because we work with organic vegetables, and I'm not like, I don't waver on getting a Chinese ingredient if it's not organic. I just either try to make it ourselves with organic things, or we use organic seasonal produce to kind of make we make like substitutions that we think basically a Chinese technique could adapt that ingredient to the dish. So we do that already, but I just didn't feel like we had to do it more than what we already do at the restaurant. And for the sake of really, we wanted the recipes to be as true as possible to the restaurant, and also kind of show that Chinese cooking is not easy. It's very nuanced. It's very layered. Sure, there's some things that could be easy to put together, but a lot of the easy things, just like a lot of my mentors have really showed me, even in their own cooking, even the most simple dishes, if you decide to really get close and really observe, there are these finer points to any dish that will make them that much better. And I think, I kind of think that with the publisher, once we were able to kind of make those compromises, then we just kind of took out recipes that kind of involved, like we couldn't put our beef tendon dish on, even though we wanted to, but it required a commercial slicer. And so there's like some things that are, realistically, I was wanting to have it, even though it was like things that I wanted to put into some of the recipes, we had to strip out some of the garnishes that, required having your own dehydrator, having, kind of like a stone mill to grind, sesames down for a sauce, like that, those kind of things. Like I was like, okay, like I want the cookbook to still be useful to people, and I still want it to be something that gets cooked. I mean that's the success of a cookbook, is to actually have people use it and get to experience the success of that recipe themselves. But I also, I think we were kind of weighing it with the fact that like we think very differently at the restaurant. We purposely make food that is difficult to do at, like you couldn't do just at really home. That's part of cooking in a restaurant. Like in some ways, like we try to think of dishes that involve probably some more people, some more equipment, and hopefully like the result feels like it is something that is not something that you can just make at home. So trying to find that middle ground as well, that wasn't as easy, because I think our mentality of writing some of these recipes is to make them feel special for going out to a restaurant.
And I find that really funny too, because my partner bakes a lot and he buys these French pastry books that are not easy, that require him tracking down equipment that you cannot find from a kitchen equipment store. And yet there exist a million of these French pastry books. But then as soon as you're like, I want to write a Chinese cookbook where the recipes some of them are hard, they're a project, people are like, oh no, we got to scale back.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the complexity too of Chinese food that hasn't been explored. Like a lot of these old menus, even up into like the 60s, 70s, and there's a chef, Yubo who Brandon knows is the opener, the chapter opener for Small Bites in this book. They like, their menus are based on poetry, and each dish and each step and ingredient that you layer on is supposed to like add a layer of this message that not only rhymes but also is like a pun for the seasons and like the discovery of the first sprout under the snow in the springtime, and the level that this is like banquet, like true banquet level cooking, which Brandon does in a Chinatown, from a Chinatown perspective, and like that level of complexity, like where do we even begin with that?
Yeah.
If we really wanted to explain what all the thinking behind like why Brandon's third course has like soup in it or something, you know? And I think there was even here, I bet like true people who are true connoisseurs of Chinese food. Well, I know they feel this way. They're like, you guys, this is Chinese American food. Like they could see the difference already. And like there's just a limit to how much complexity we can include, you know, even at this stage. Maybe there's room for Brandon's most complex cooking book and then Brandon's cooking at home book.
Yeah.
But this is the Mr. Jiu's book.
And like on top of that, I think, especially with Chinese food, you're fighting up against sort of this paradox where people, you know, they want the food to be easy, but then there's also all these biases that people have against Chinese food, or even the notion of Chinese American food and certain dishes that are sort of perceived to be greasy or cheap. And I'm sort of wondering how you sort of thought about combating those biases that people have.
Yeah, I think for that, because I think I was pretty staunch on having people understand that what they're paying for when they come to Mr. Jiu's is really the quality of ingredients. And yes, like we put in a lot of work on the culinary side of like how we're going to use Chinese techniques and flavors to showcase those ingredients. But I think at first and foremost, like it's really the curating of those high quality ingredients that I think is what they're really paying for. So when we talk about like Wolf Ranch quail and you know, if we have gooey duck, or we have like our really like our XO sauce that we make from brining scallops ourselves, you know, like and those scallops are, you know, day boat scallops that we get from the East Coast. Those are a lot of the base points of the prices of where we start. But I also I kind of want to have that conversation of like this is maybe something you're not used to seeing, the size portion or the kind of or some of the prices might be semi sticker shock, but these are the true realities, especially when you're paying your staff a very livable wage. And you know, these are all points where the price is affected. But in return, what I hope is that people understand they're paying towards a food system that I believe in, and hopefully they do too, of organics and local seasonal eating. So if they believe that that's the way that food should be grown and served, then their money is going to these small farms, and they're going to these organic productions. So I think that's the part that I've never felt like we could waver on, because those are some of the things that for me, I mean, maybe it's because like I was a bio major and that I really love just learning about food and animals just from a kid. I always loved, well, I always loved food, but I always loved like plants and animals too. So when I got to meet some of the farmers in my first jobs, like at Zuni Cafe or at Quince, or even when I was living in China and Italy, that it's really like the products and the farms and like all of those things where you can get a lot of really interesting understandings of these ingredients. And to me, like that's where also there's these creative moments that can happen within a season within an ingredient, just because if you understand how it's grown, and the stages of what that plant will go through from the beginning of the season to the end, you can actually understand how to best cook it. And I mean, I tell my cooks, like, that's what we're invested in. That's organic products too, that you get a lot of variability, but it's our job, our expertise to actually be able to transform the ingredient to really showcase either the stage that it's in, or the qualities of that stage specifically. And to give an example, it's like right now the peas, it's the beginning of the season for English peas, and they're sweet. You can eat them raw. You can just pop them in, and they're sweet and tender, and they I mean, even like, you don't even need to blanch them. You can even just marinate them, and they're just delicious. Later in the season, that sugar will turn to starch, and you will have to cook them to give them its best qualities. And so adapting the recipe, or adapting even or changing the recipe to actually still be able to really showcase those English peas and those characteristics even later in the season. Cooked out English pea is also delicious too. And so that's how our menu kind of develops over the season, even like for one ingredient like that.
Go ahead, Tienlon.
Can I just say that, like, the expectation, to your first point, Priya, like the expectation that Chinese food is cheap is actually not how it's always been. Like, Brandon's type of restaurant is like a banquet type restaurant, or like a very the kind of restaurant that like really focuses, as you can tell, on ingredients and the quality and where they come from and who's growing them. And that's actually a very old world, including Chinese focus on ingredients. And so in Chinatown, with like the first restaurant that was in Brandon's space, Hang Fai Lo, they were one of the most expensive restaurants, but they had 2 floors. So the middle floor was like the cheap stuff, and that was like convenience snacky noodles and things like that, and it like just or like a steak. And then the top floor was like this wonderful, this is the first mushrooms that we found foraged, like in the East Bay, and this is the asparagus stalks that we grew just for this, that we grew under a tent so that they're white, and they forced they're the pale sprouts, things like that. That was very expected, but only within that kind of genre of Chinese food. And even in like Johnny Can's time, like the 1960s, at this kind of restaurant where like Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe would come eat, there were dishes on that menu that were like $120, the equivalent of $120 for like little bites of shrimp and pork on little discs of crackers, like of not crackers, but they're mantou and little buns. And so that sort of expectation has changed from the 1960s till now. And so the fact that, like people challenge Brandon on his prices just shows you like what we've lost and what we've forgotten, that as the kinds of food that's been offered to most of mainstream America has been forced to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, that expectation of what is possible with Chinese food has been lost.
Totally. And it like speaks to how sort of these non-white cuisines have sort of been reduced to a monolith and just totally flattened within American culture, because there is a lot of nuance that gets lost, and instead people know a cuisine that is breathtaking in its diversity by 3 dishes.
That's right.
Did you all feel like with those sort of classically sort of Chinese American dishes that people tend to know, did you feel, well, Brendan, did you feel hesitant to include any of those on the menu at Mr. Jiu's? And then did both of you think about whether or not to include those in the cookbook then?
Yeah. I think, having even something like General Tso's or orange chicken or kung pao or those are still, I mean, those are like really delicious dishes that I think everyone enjoys. It was more that like, what do they enjoy about it is more of the, I think, question that I was asking not only myself but my cooks too. And a lot of it is, you know, whether it's like the combination of something sour and something sweet, or something that's that crispy then coated with that kind of flavor profile. I think we try to just kind of backtrack a little bit and say, well, that's not wrong to just really feel like that's delicious, and not even to maybe feel like it's indulgent. But I think I think wanting to make sure that we use kind of a culinary mind to find some more of those naturally sweet and sour things. There, I mean, right now there's rhubarb, and so any time that there's rhubarb, it's like I think that gives me a kind of indication that there's this sourness that is on one extreme that is really, I mean, it's no surprise that strawberry and rhubarb, oh, like they come together really naturally because people love that combination. So um I think I think I think we just we wanted to um like I think that's where the like the point of view of the restaurant, if we were able to kind of showcase the point of view, even if it's something like orange chicken. For us, it was uh, like we put the orange chicken wings dish, something that we had on our menu, but ended up putting it on our lounge menu that's upstairs in the Moongate Lounge. Um, and that became a kind of a place that we put a little more casual food, like, yeah, kind of like hors d'oeuvres or appetizers or those kind of things, up there. Um, but yeah, I guess there wasn't, I guess we didn't have like we didn't get pressured to like put some of those
Yeah.
dishes that were more, I think, known. I think we wanted to, I think that's the thing is like even when I write menus, I realize that for every, you know, the reason why chop suey and egg foo young were popular were because those were dishes that were created for an American palate.
Great.
Those weren't the only dishes that were on on that restaurant's menu. Those are the ones that got popular, and they knew that by having them on the menu, that could just be kind of a gateway to other dishes.
Yeah.
So for us, like, you know, I'd never maybe thought I would be serving pot stickers at my restaurant, but the reality is that that is something that I know people a um, have a love for. I do too, and I would be fooling myself if I didn't say that I love specific things about a pot sticker, um, and that they are hands down just delicious. So finding a way that we can make them culinary focused. For us, it's like seasonally we go through kind of what fillings or what colors that we will be kind of imparting into the dough, um, to represent that season. That was enough for us to like be just very interested in having it on the menu. But for me, like it's on the menu because I know in the case of someone looking at our menu and not feeling comfortable because they didn't know something, that pot sticker is like just kind of there to you know, make them feel comfortable, and then hopefully they might order something else that they feel adventurous in. But I think having both is something that even I as a kid, like I wanted to have that mix. And I love that Chinese restaurants usually give that kind of adventurous diner something to order. But having something that that is also comforting and something that you've had before, and you know is consistent. I think having a mix of those two things is kind of how we create the menu in some ways at Mr. Jiu's.
And we've sort of talked a lot about, I feel like in other conversations, just like who cookbooks are for and what audience ends up getting centered when we write a cookbook. And I know then that when I wrote my cookbook, I was sort of constantly thinking about a white reader. You know, I was just like, how do I make this food such that like a white person will want to make it? They won't think that it's like intimidating. And I think one thing that's really refreshing about your book is that it's pretty sort of unapologetic in its approach. You can tell it's not really trying to whitewash or dumb anything down. You know, you own up to the techniques that are hard, and you say like, this is hard because like this technique is inherently hard. You include, you know, the names of things in Chinese, which is something that, you know, a non-Chinese speaking person wouldn't understand, but it's important. It was important to you all to sort of center that perspective. And I'm sort of wondering, like, was there a particular audience you were writing to, or like, were you sort of mindful of not wanting to center a white audience as so many cookbooks often do?
Do you want to do that one, T?
Sure. Yes, we thought so much about this, and we talked a lot about this, and taking the Chinese characters and names as an example. I mean, it at first, in some ways, it's kind of like a practical solution, because so many of these dishes, if we were to just translate into English, that's where we get the funny things on a menu that you laugh at, because you're like, that's literally what it means,
Right.
but that means nothing culturally. And so having multiple names for things that were in multiple dialects actually best represented what those dishes mean to the people who they mean the most to. So we tried really hard to think about representing Chinatown to people in Chinatown. That was one of the audiences, because we wanted, nothing like that's ever been done quite. It's like you feel proud that you've been represented, like that you've been written about, but everything you know about it isn't in the book or in the article. And that was something that was really important, is just to acknowledge that like the people who know this stuff best are the people in Chinatown, and this is what they would call it. And then Brandon talked a lot about wanting to have this for posterity. So like posterity of his own cooks, like the ones who are coming up and who are learning these techniques from him, that he's passing them to, because he didn't have that same opportunity. So it's like, this was to document for people who want to know what these techniques are and to learn from and build off of. And so then also that ties into like the rest of the Chinese American experience, like the people who know these dishes very personally, but don't know how to cook them, or you know, enjoyed them with their families, but didn't really understand why something meant so much to their father. And then, of course, the greater audience, who is the majority of our readers and who we care about so much, but we thought they would appreciate knowing this perspective for once, rather than having everything translated and lost. They wouldn't even know what they're missing. And so it's not that it was geared towards the white reader or the majority reader. It was geared towards ultimately the reader who's always wanted to know this, and who loves this kind of food and this kind of effort that Brandon and his team puts in. And now they can know more about it and appreciate it even more.
I think that's amazing. And you just really don't see that in cookbooks, and it really shines through and just feels so different. Okay, we have a lot of audience questions, so I'm going to try to pick out some good ones. So this is a great one, and I'm actually curious about this. Someone wants to know sort of what are some of the examples of those older historical Chinese cookbooks referenced, and sort of if there are resources for people to find out about the recipes and cookbooks that got lost in the fire.
Yeah, so tough. I mean, those are the cookbooks that are written by like masters. Let me just say, masters don't write down they don't make cookbooks. because all of this stuff was about all of Chinese cooking for the longest time is about apprenticeship and learning from a master and paying your dues in the kitchen, and things weren't written down. So, and for practical reasons too, in the way that Brandon talks about ingredients and how they change day by day, and you just, a real master cook doesn't really think about things that way, right? It's not like today I use 2 cups, so tomorrow I will too. But in terms of like the historical cookbooks that we relied on for this, for example, the ones that are in Chinese are very old. They're like, one of my favorites is the recipes from the Garden of Contentment. It's from the 1700s, and that was sort of like this culinary renaissance in China, and it represents a lot of the principles that are still around today. But that one was written by this like traveling gastronomer, and he's not a cook himself. He's just like, he just ate, he was gluttonous, and then he wrote these things down. So it's kind of funny to see his interpretation, and I wonder how chefs would have felt about it. But then all the other historical cookbooks that like Brandon relies on, I'll let him name some of his favorites. But I mean, those are all post earthquake, because there are some that are well, there are some that came out, like there are 1 or 2 that came out in the 1800s that were written for like house servants, because a lot of Chinese immigrants who came, they were only allowed to be employed in certain ways, and one of those ways was as domestic servants, and they would cook, like American classics, but then also write down some of the things that their American clients really enjoyed. And those are the recipes we have, like very old 1800 example of egg foo young with the brown gravy sauce, that kind of thing. And the name of that I cannot recall, but I can share out later if everyone's interested. But I mean, that's one I found in the archives at Bancroft at UC Berkeley. But Brandon has a bunch of Chinese American cookbooks that he loves. I can recommend.
Yeah, there's really any book from Florence Lin or Eileen Yin Fei Lo, and any book that Grace Young has written. Those are great places to start. Irene Kuo is a great author. Ken Hom is a great author. I think I kind of felt like also a big reason why I wanted to get this book out too was there hasn't been a lot of Chinese cookbooks written by Chinese chefs in restaurants, that own restaurants, and a lot of restaurant ownership in the past in a Chinese way has been usually from a restaurateur hiring a Chinese chef, and then a lot of the other books out there are, travel, or I would say historian point of views, but there hasn't been a lot from Chinese chefs specifically, and even when I was with Jowett, who is a chef in Hong Kong, I was encouraging him, like, he has a real deep wealth of knowledge that I'm hoping, some publisher will convince him, because there's what he knows about Chinese cooking and techniques. Those are things that I hope that can get passed to another generation. And I mean, unfortunately, Chinese chefs have been very secretive, like, about certain techniques and about certain things. So this book also was about trying to be very transparent of our observations, our learnings from the 3 years that it took to produce the book. And I mean, but we're actively still working on these recipes, or refining them, or using some of our philosophy to make new ones. But I think just wanting to encourage, especially right now, I think there is more Asian chefs out there, and hopefully that publishers will give them an opportunity to write their book. So
Totally. I'm curious, someone asked a really good question that she was curious if there were any, as you were researching, if there was anything that you learned that surprised you, or that you felt like you didn't know, and that felt like I didn't expect that.
the Bing cherry thing is like the first thing that reminded me of like, because when Tienlon told me that, I was like, what? Like, so I don't know if anyone had gotten to that recipe yet out there, but yeah, there was a farmer that, right, Tienlon, that developed that cherry, and I think our farmer markets, there's only a couple of people that grow cherries organically, that go to the farmers market to sell. And so whenever they have Bing cherries, I'm always like on top of like getting cases, but I didn't know that cherry was developed by a Chinese American.
There are lots of fruits like that, actually, like a lot of hybrid citrus. It's like it's actually like and that's one of the cultural differences between that became very clear to me. Like in the United States, if somebody bred something, they would name it after themselves, a Meyer lemon. But a lot of these like pears and citrus that Chinese farmers brought over, the names are lost to whatever they called them, but they are what we eat now. And you can go down to the citrus farm down in down in California, in SoCal, University of California. They have a huge citrus collection in any case, and many of those were created by hybridizing by the efforts of Chinese American farmers. There's so many things like that aren't in this book, actually, and Brandon knows how many we cut 80,000 words out of this book.
Wow.
And that's because that you can go down so many rabbit holes like this. I think like one of the fun things for me, discoveries, was the ducks, which Brandon knew more about than I did. And then I had a long interview with the Liberty Ducks guy.
I loved that part. That part was fascinating.
There's so much more to that too, but there's only so much you could say in that space. But Jim, is that Jim? He was just a kid, and he would go around Chinatown with his dad and like deliver these live ducks to all the Chinatown businesses. And also at the time, Chinatown's butcher shops were the ones that served all of San Francisco. So everyone got like Chinese butchered pork and Chinese butchered like poultry and ducks and things like that. From the highest end restaurants that were, serving like that are still around today, like Tadish Grill and things like that, till to like the Stanford Hotel. And he would deliver these huge crates of these live ducks, and like every single Chinese business gave him his family a key to their back door, and they would drop these ducks off. And I just think that relationship is so cool. And then the idea that much of their decisions for breeding these ducks, they're all from what the Chinese community in Chinatown wanted. And so a lot of the ducks that we still eat today are very much shaped by these early calls from these Chinese businesses and Chinese butchers and what Chinese people wanted.
Yeah, the Liberty Farm duck story is pretty cool, just from
So awesome.
Like that. Really, even Alice Waters, when she first started to try to find a duck to put on the Chez Panisse menu, she basically found, I think through either Cecilia or through Johnny Can. Johnny was, I guess, from what Liberty told me, that he was the one that was really giving a lot of specificity of what size duck, really like any feeding things that needed to be altered so that maybe certain parts were more accentuated, or the quality of fat was denser, or all these little finer points when you have that relationship with a farmer or a rancher, you have kind of really like a relationship with each other, that if you find someone that's willing to change some of what they do, so that so they understand what for you creates a better end product. I think that was something that I didn't know Liberty had that kind of history with Chinatown. And so knowing their name through menus that I was reading on like Chez Panise's menu when I was just coming up as a cook, that was really kind of, yeah, just another moment to really be proud of Chinese American cuisine, and even just like, yeah, some of these really important people like Johnny Can, in developing Chinese American food and making
pioneering the California, I would even say like pioneering the California cuisine movement.
Yeah.
They were ahead of we think of us and that crew. But like, yeah, if Johnny Can was doing this in the 1950s, and even before that, if Hank Farlow was sourcing all of these things specifically from their farms out, in Central Valley and North, I mean, that was the beginning of California cuisine.
Totally. That's so cool. That part really sent me down a rabbit hole in particular. Okay, this seems like a quick and fun one to end on. Someone wants to know, how did you both meet and sort of decide on doing like a partnership for this book?
How did we? I think we met from when you were writing for Lucky Peach.
Tienlon? Yeah, I mean, we knew of each other because we live in the same town, and there are only so many of us in this world of cooking and food and Chinese Americanness. But actually, I mean, the first time I really talked to you, Brandon, I don't know if you knew, there was a time where I saw you at Vic's Trot and I didn't say anything, but that's like years ago. I'm kidding. But I did. I saw you and your whole crew. I'm like, that's Brandon Jiu. So our mutual, Brandon's agent and our mutual agent introduced us, and that was a very practical way of meeting. But like I said, for me, what really hit me, because I wasn't sure I wanted to do a book with anybody, but what really struck me with Brandon was the sincerity with which he talked about his place in the continuum, and wanting to really document this for everyone and not just like to show off. That really resonated with me, and I knew that it would be a good book because of that, because that is how he is and how thoughtful he is. Uh-oh. Are we frozen?
Hey, Priya, you frozen?
Oh no, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. Brandon, did you want to jump in and tell us what made you want to work with Tienlon on this book?
Yeah, sure. I think because I knew, I think when you look at the team that I kind of formed, a lot of people will see on the surface that we're all Chinese American. That wasn't a criteria of being on the team, that it just happened to be that way. I chose everyone for their talents and their and really like the career that they've already had forged. But I think Tienlon, in our interactions, I knew she was a very like
Did Brandon just freeze?
I think he did.
Oh.
Am I back?
Yeah, you pause it saying you knew from all of the interactions that Tienlon was a very
fill in the blank, Mad Lib.
She was a very thoughtful and just well researched. So I think knowing that the book was going to be also like about Chinatown and the stories of that have inspired us, she just felt like the right fit for me. I tell people also, like, the other person that was well, we had, you know, other people, but I think the trifecta that we had was me, Tienlon, and Pete Lee. And Pete is like a very true artist, very, very much so. So I felt like they represented two sides of me in a way, and I thought that it would be a really good way to express the book by having their personalities on the team.
Well, I mean, it really is an unbelievable book. And thank you all. Thank you both so much for sharing it with the world. And thank you all for coming and listening to us nerd out about the history of Chinese food. This stuff is so fascinating to me. And the book sort of offers the best of both, with delicious recipes and just like an amazing history lesson that you really haven't read in any other contemporary cookbook. So thank you so much for writing this book. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This was great.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Priya.
you. Thanks, Priya.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah.
All right.